Of course not.
And he's probably spinning it. Well, I would say in his grave, but he's
cremated.
Ashes somewhere.
His ashes are jumping.
His ashes are. I don't know what happens to ashes. Anyway, but that's kind of for me. I remember as a very young person talking about that, and I grew up under the misguided notion that I was not white.
Mm-hmm.
And because of all the conversations we had, because talking about, playing cowboys and Indians, we always wanted to play Indians because the cowboys were the bad guys, And so really, that was how it felt growing up. So for me, it was pretty young, but it wasn't, I did not get the, bitch, you really white. One, until I stopped tanning.
Right.
And I never actively tanned. I didn't go to a tanning bed. I didn't lay out in the sun. I would literally just go for a little walk and come back with a tan.
Yeah.
But when I first started performing, I was, much darker than I am now. And people would ask me all the time if I was of some mixed heritage. Of course, back then, people didn't ask nicely, are you of mixed heritage?
They're like, what are you?
What are you? Or they'd say, are you mulatto?
Oh.
Or in my life, in those days, I got, are you mulatto? Are you Hawaiian?
Oh, yeah.
Are
Sure.
you
all they saw was a big brown girl, and they're all,
Big brown girl. Must be, right, Mexican?
Pacific Islander.
Right.
Crazy.
I do wish. But,
We're not so lucky.
it was, and then later as I kept getting whiter and whiter because I stayed out of the sun, I was like, oh, bitch, you just white. And then to really cap it off, to really just put the nail in that coffin, was when I did Ancestry. And it said, girl, you
lay down,
glow in the dark. You're so white. So
when the sun goes out, we're going to put you out to light the earth.
Yeah.
I love that for us.
And you?
When was the first time I was aware of race? I have to think about it. Because growing up in the country, it was mostly white people, of course. The interesting thing is, though, I was raised by your mother. And your mother, my whole life, was brown.
Yes.
My entire life.
Still is, by the way.
Right. And I remember going to school, and since being raised by her, Grandma was always at school with me. I remember, because I'm pasty white, my parents are pasty white, that before people knew that she was like my grandma, other kids thought she was my nanny or whatever, you know what I mean? Thought she was taking me home because my parents worked. When in all reality, that was like very, very young. And I didn't understand, obviously, that what was happening. I just remember being very confused why I was the color of lined paper and my grandmother had like this beautiful russet skin. Yeah. And I was upset about that. I remember that and feeling, what? Why? Like, why do I have to look like this? But that was like the first time I was understood race, was when everyone was like, who's that lady? My grandma. And they're all, no. Look at each other. You guys are V different. Nor. I'm obviously Australian, not as my heritage. No, but you talking about playing like cowboys and Indians when you're younger. I remember vividly in grade school playing with these girls, and they were indigenous, and they were very into their culture. And I was like, oh my god, my grandma's native too. And so we would play Indians and Pilgrims.
Did you kill them?
Yeah, and that was the whole point, is that we were the Indians, and then like all the other white children were the Pilgrims, and we would just like not play with them and avoid them and scream Pilgrim and run.
They didn't have blankets full of small
Girl,
dogs.
I don't know what was wrong with us. I guess like the country, maybe we were learning about that at the time, but we were like, oh, clearly we're the natives and you're the Pilgrims.
You're the white people.
Right.
That we must avoid. Think of how much different the world would have been.
Girl.
Just kill them on sight.
I know.
Sink their boats. Whatever.
Oh, here comes something over the ocean. Destroy it. That would be my...
Set it ablaze.
Yeah, I know.
If you can swim out to the boat with your torch still lit, set it on fire.
I'm sorry. You don't have community. You don't know how to you don't know how to grow things. You don't know how to bathe yourself. Why did you come here? You pest. That's what... Right. The white people who came to America initially were obviously just more pests.
So I want to say two things about what you said. So you were talking about being as white as lined paper.
Yeah.
And I saw the funniest thing the other day where a woman was talking about white people. Mm-hmm. And it was a black woman talking about white people and referring to them as 8.5 by 11. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't get it. And sometimes I'm a little slow. I was like, because she's like, and then I ran into this 8.5 by 11. I was like, what? And then because white paper is 8.5 by 11. Got it. Okay, because they as white as paper and probably as fragile. The other thing, the russet skin. I'm going to tell you, I had the same reaction you did when reading the whole entire Twilight series.
Oh, girl.
When every time she talked about Jacob, it had to be, and his russet skin this, and his russet... You know, did she ever say what color Bella was?
No.
But she could have been purple for all I know. Because we talked about the Coens. Because
who glittered
like fucking disco balls in the sun. So that was important that we talk about that.
Yeah, obviously.
We established right out of the gate that Jacob was indigenous.
Right.
So we can just assume that his skin was not pasty white.
Right.
And you told us once. That was good. We got it. He's brown.
Sure.
Lovely. Beautiful brown skin. But russet? Is he a potato?
Girl, and then every
time.
Single
every
time. There was no other way. She has a thesaurus. I guess when you're a Mormon, they only give you one book, and it's the Book of Mormon.
Is she a Mormon?
I mean, Reformed, lapsed. I'm not sure. She's that.
White people. Oh my God. You know, it wasn't until the 70s that the Mormons decided they could include black people because God changed his mind.
No. Okay, there's this whole controversy going around, or there's a lot considering the Mormon people. But right now talking about how they believed, it was taught to them in their sacred book, that the indigenous people of the Americas were the 13th, lost tribe of Israel. And now that's obviously proven to not be true. And now it's a pillar of their religion is being cracked in half.
Oh, no.
How cute.
I hate it when you challenge the beliefs of white people.
And then they have nothing else to say and it just breaks.
Right.
It was really strong to begin with.
I just want to throw this out there and then we'll get to question number 2 because this is really all we're still talking about question number 1. One of the things that I love, I learned this, I think a year or two ago. I was watching Bob the Drag Queen do her stand-up comedy.
Love that.
And she was saying how she was going to give away one of the secrets of the black community. And I think this really is, because I'd never heard this before, and now I've seen other black people do this. When they're referring to white people, but they don't want to say white people, they point to the palm of their hand.
Palm colored.
Because he was talking about how his mother would say, "Now you're going to be around," and then just tap on, so behave, don't embarrass me, whatever. And he, of course, Bob is very dark. So the palm of his hand is still darker than I would ever even dream of being in my best dreams. But it was that cracks me up. And I watched a TikTok video where this woman wasn't trying to be sick. But every time she said white people, she would flip over her hand. And I think she was doing it quite subconsciously. And so I actually messaged her and I go, I love that every single time you said white people, you pointed at the palm of your hand. I love that.
I think it's hysterical.
All right, let's go on to question number 2.
Okay. So question 2 says, what do you remember from your childhood about how you made sense of human differences? And there's a second part to that question, but it's about you having children. We'll get there.
Okay.
But, so yeah, what do you remember from your childhood?
Human differences.
And how did you make sense of it? I think it's a very interesting question for the both of us.
It is interesting, but I don't know, because I remember not really thinking much about it. I remember, again, we grew up in Whitesville with all the whiteys and their whiteness and whatever. So, honestly, unless I saw someone on television, the most different I saw anybody was if there was someone around me who was in a wheelchair.
Sure.
Or if there was someone who, I don't know, had some sort of physical thing.
Yeah.
I remember being around this kid who had some pretty serious physical deformities, and it was that was the different.
Sure.
And if I saw someone of color, it was probably on television.
Yeah.
Probably on a musical program because, there was almost nobody of color. When I was the first black woman on television, and there's the clock that she was talking about earlier.
The third person in our podcast.
Clock. Either that or it is a commentary on me and my beliefs.
Girl.
But Diane Carroll was the first black woman to lead a series. And she played a nurse. As opposed to, so often if people of color were put into a TV series, they were A, a background character, and B, they were a domestic. Or whatever. It's there was never a main role. So she was the first one. So people I saw that were different than me were on television. Other than, like I said, the things that so I don't know that I really thought much about it. I mean, it's just like, oh,
yep,
those people,
yeah,
have more melanin than me. And
sure. Human difference for me, because I don't think of that strictly in terms of race, which I probably should. But again, the only people who were in the town that at that point in Carleton, there were a few indigenous families and a few like Hispanic families, and other than that, there wasn't much racial diversity. The diversity was more like I went to school with a kid who had Down syndrome, and there was a woman in the town who I don't remember. I was young. I don't remember what her condition was, but she walked with crutches at all times. Okay. And so there was always and I went to school with a girl my whole life who was deaf, right? Okay. So there were things like that. But what the interesting thing is, growing up poor and abused and queer, I felt like I was the different one. And so seeing all of these other people, even the people who were considered like other, quote unquote other, right? Like whether they had like a learning disability or a physical ailment, whatever, people in the town still knowing them and trying with them, right? But not that. I didn't feel that same thing. I felt literally like the outcast. So it's interesting about human difference, right? Is like I felt like the different. And I felt like, oh, you must be different because everybody else who is considered other is being treated with respect and you're not. And so that was the interesting concept for me.
It is.
And it wasn't until I got older. I remember I transferred high schools when I was 15 years old, and it was the first time that I had ever seen like a Muslim girl in a hijab. I had never, and I was like, what is, I had no idea, right? Growing up in the country, I had no idea. But I think, again, growing up in the time that I did, because I was born at the very end of I almost said 90s, 80s, I had the privilege of coming to Portland and staying with you. So my idea of diversity was much bigger than most little kids in the country. Do you know what I mean? Because most of your friends were queer, and most of your friends were people of color, and so that's who I knew. You know what I mean? And like, and that to me was like, this is where I need to be. And as a kid, that I think was the reason that I was able to get out of Carleton. I need to get out of here. You know what I mean? Because there was more difference in Portland than there was.
Sure. Well, because Carleton, really, there is none.
There is none, no.
I mean, and all these years later, I graduated from high school in 1980, moved away shortly thereafter, and other than the economy out there, little has changed. It still is the same white landscape. There are people, Latinx families and stuff out there now who are mostly farm workers. That's it. And then a crap ton of white people.
Yeah.
Really.
That's it.
That's what you get.
That's really it.
And it's the same, I mean, they're mostly in the same socioeconomic levels. Yeah. It's the same. It's all the same, which is why I couldn't wait to get out of there. I couldn't wait to get to the city. I couldn't wait to be around different people. Because I had always felt like you said, I had always felt like the different people. Yep. And I was the one who was othered, and I was the one who was whatever. But I know, again, for, what we've learned, that it's still different. I mean, I came into the city and people weren't looking at me like, oh, she's weird, she's different.
None of that.
I mean, they might have been. But who cares? But there were still enough other people who would fall into the same kind of categories as I fell into. That it was like, oh, she's just one of that group.
Yep, exactly. It wasn't so severe, right? No. There wasn't this such us versus them kind of mentality. No. And in the country, that's all there was.
Yeah.
The second part of that question is, because we're talking about how you made sense of human difference. If you have kids, is it different for them today than your own experience? And I already know the answer to this, because yes, because most of the people your children know, again, are queer people and people of color. Yeah. And so my favorite thing is going back to, I don't know, our last episode we talked about Rocky Horror, and you just had your kids watch it. And one of your kids' only question was, why it takes so long to kill Rocky with the laser gun? Opposed to like, why is Frankenfurter dressed like that? Or, you know what I mean? What about the scenes where he's, like, sleeping with a man, sleeping with a woman? Like, there was no issue
about, they didn't care about any of that.
Gender, queerness. They were like, and why does that man take so long to die? Like, very interesting to me. Because, as a kid, if there was a queer person on television, I was like, we're watching this currently.
One of my favorite questions that my children ask is she a man? And it's always about the drag queens on Drag Race. I'm like, first of all, the fact that you can ask that question and not think anything of it, because they're like, well, she, because they're looking at these beautiful women. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, but what about this one? Is she a man?
Yep.
And so we were going through the other two.
That's a man, Maury.
Right.